On the surface, Andrew Christopher Lamb lived an idyllic lifestyle. He appeared to be a successful British businessman. He seemed to have extraordinary contacts working for clients such as the Moroccan royal family and the Egyptian military. He lived in a grand villa in Malta, drove a Porsche, and was a luxury yacht captain. But he was not who he claimed to be. What his clients and the holidaymakers on the yachts he was commissioned to run didn't know was that he was involved in the 4-hour torture and eventual murder of 44-year-old Brian Waters in rural Cheshire in July 2003. Andrew Drew Lamb was in fact Christopher Guest More Jnr, one of Europe's most wanted fugitives. This is the incredible story of how he evaded capture for over 16 years. You are watching OCG TV. Now, we all have bad habits. Mine was the kind you think you're doing so well going without. You're down the pub with a group of mates and they're all reaching for their bad habits. You feel that urge not to be left out and ask to borrow one of theirs. Well, what if I were to tell you there's a better alternative that helps you kick your bad habit in an enjoyable way? Something you can take out with you. Our sponsor, Fume, is on a mission to accelerate humanity's breakup from the bad habits that consume far too many of us. Fume is a natural diffusive device that uses plants and behavioral science to help you trade out your negative habit for a positive one. Instead of pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals like a vape, Fume uses cores infused with plants like peppermint for delicious natural flavors. There are a few reasons as to why I'm so impressed. Fume has lots of delicious flavors to choose from, like crisp mint and orange vanilla. The device itself looks awesome with a weighted, high-quality design, and it doesn't need to be charged up before you head out. Fume has served over 150,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use my code OCGTV to get 10% off a journey pack. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code OCGTV or scan the QR code on screen to save 10% off your order today. Now, let's begin the first chapter. Chapter 1. Warning Signs. Christopher More's upbringing did not suggest he would go on to become a criminal. He grew up in privilege and wealth, and although not a natural academic during school days, he excelled as a junior sportsman, a talented swimmer who also represented Cheshire at lacrosse as a youth. The family home at Burford Lane Farm in Lymm was more of a gated estate, complete with a swimming pool where members of the More clan resided in their own separate houses. Upon leaving school, the teenage Christopher Guest More Jr. joined the family business. But this was no run-of-the-mill construction firm or retail operation. Christopher Guest More Sr. was involved in the world of surveillance and intelligence gathering. Like his dad, the son soon proved to have the skills to make a success of himself in the industry. By his mid-20s, he had infiltrated an organised crime gang on a notorious estate in Wolverhampton and a far-right movement in Nottingham during projects working with the likes of Channel 4's Dispatches and the BBC. An investigation by the Daily Mail newspaper found that Moore and his cousin James Raven were employed as operatives, overseen by the current head of BBC Three, Fiona Campbell. Documents obtained by the Mail reveal her approach was signed off by Peter Horrocks, the then head of current affairs, who went on to become the director of the World Service, Stephen Whittle, the head of editorial policy, and Roger Law, the head of the BBC legal department. The two men were paid almost £52,000 for one film on counterfeiters and were still being consulted over issues in post-production when they murdered Mr. Waters. Controversy increased when it was revealed Raven had a conviction for violence, but the BBC allowed he and Moore, who had been cleared of rape aged 18, to work for the corporation. The BBC broadcast the film, including the pair's secretly filmed footage, 2 years later, even though Raven had been jailed and Moore was on the run. If you were to believe his own account, this was the extent of Moore's interest in criminality. But, in reality, he had become involved in the underworld himself, and in a big way. Chapter 2. The Background. In the early 2000s, John Wilson was one of Manchester's most notorious gangsters. Another figure in the underworld scene around that time was a man named Brian Waters. Waters had contacts in the Netherlands and would broker drug deals between Wilson and his Dutch associates. While travelling back to the UK from Holland on one occasion in 1999, Mr. Waters was caught at a port trying to smuggle £23,000, monies belonging to Wilson. This sort of incident was par for the course when it comes to working in the underworld, and the pair continued heavy involvement with one another, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Mr. Waters eventually began dealing cocaine on Wilson's behalf by late 2002. Around Christmas time of the same year, he was robbed of several thousands of pounds worth of drugs at gunpoint while in Manchester, and therefore left further indebted to Mr. Wilson. This time, Wilson would not be so forgiving. This was where Christopher Moore, then a stocky young man who stood at around 5'10" in height and had short mousy brown hair, came in. An increasingly angered Wilson instructed Moore to put his famed talents for surveillance to use on the Waters family. Upon tailing Mr. Waters' son Gavin from their Nantwich home to Burnt House Farm in Tabley, he discovered a cannabis farm they had set up on the side. A side earner set up to help Waters pay off the debt incurred to John Wilson. Wilson gave the orders for his gang to ransack the grow, stealing both the drugs and the cultivating equipment from the factory. 6 months after Waters was robbed in Manchester, it was time to act. June 19, 2003 was the strike date, the day after Mr. Waters' daughter Natalie's 21st birthday, and only 3 days after he and his wife Julie had returned from a nearly month-long visit to the Netherlands. Christopher Moore's involvement was to continue past the reconnaissance stage. He recruited 2 accomplices, Otis Matthews and Ashley Guishard, to assist in the break-in. They gathered the evening before to thrash out the finer details. At roughly 4 a.m. on the Thursday morning, the trio set off for the rural site, which was situated only a stone's throw from junction 19 of the M6 at Knutsford, in convoy with Moore's cousin, James Raven. Over the following few hours, they set about dismantling the cannabis farm, with Moore later claiming to have kept watch whilst the others went about their work. Fatally, the operation did not end there. Chapter 3. The Murder. In the early morning of that day, the group broke into the farm and they stripped out such dried cannabis as they could find, together with such equipment as was worth stealing, and loaded it into a horse box which they had bought for the purpose. The horse box was then driven off by Raven to the car park of a pub near the Moores' home. The group then waited for Brian Waters to arrive. At around midday, Suleiman Razak, the stepson of a man that Waters had met in prison in the 1980s and his partner in the cannabis enterprise, arrived at Burnt House Farm to tend to the grow. He was surprised when the door opened immediately. It was unlocked. He immediately felt a force from behind and he was knocked to the floor and beaten to a pulp. A passing member of the public had witnessed the initial beating whilst driving past the farm and called it to the local police.
Police. Newport connecting, payphone 01565 722 252.
Thank you. Hello, police.
Hello, hiya. I've just come off the M6 for Manchester Airport. I'm not sure the junction is 18.
Yeah.
Going towards Northwich, is it the A556?
Yes.
I've got up there, and the first farm on the right-hand side,
Yep.
it was about 500 yards. It looked like there was 3 men beating somebody up in the courtyard.
All right.
It didn't look right.
So if you come up at junction 18 and take the 556, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's 18.
It's 19, that one, actually, I think.
19, yeah, 556.
Yeah.
About 500 yards on the right,
Yeah.
going towards Northwich,
Yeah.
there's a farmyard, like, and I just like there's 3 gentlemen, or 3 men,
Right.
attacking a man.
How long ago was that?
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes ago. Okay, so what's your name, please?
I'd rather not get involved, you know.
No, fair enough, okay, I'll look into it for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye.
The police were not aware of the severity of the situation and didn't act urgently enough. Mr. Razak was subjected to extreme torture. He was suspended upside down and lowered headfirst into a barrel filled up with water, electrocuted, and burned with acidic plant food. The men demanded to know where the missing money had gone. Razak had no idea what they were talking about. A staple gun was then used to further inflict pain on him, only interrupted when Brian Waters arrived at the scene. After being whipped with canes with such ferocity that they snapped, he too was hung upside down by his ankles and beaten using a metal bar. That same metal bar was forced so far into his rectum that it struck the base of his spine, an injury which the pathologist said must have caused immense pain. The attacks on both men were more than an attempted extortion with menace. The sustained barbarity and sadism of the attack were intended to deliver a clear message, not just to Brian Waters, but also to others, that if you crossed John Wilson and failed to pay what he considered was due, there would be very serious consequences. Midway through the torture, Gavin Waters and his sister Natalie arrived at the farm. They also were both attacked. Gavin was punched and kicked, and a rope was put around his neck. A gun, an imitation firearm was later found, was put in Natalie's mouth. She was threatened with serious sexual assault. Both could see that their father was gravely injured. At some stage, Brian Waters asked for his restraints to be loosened because he could not breathe, which one of the assailants might have done, but it was too late to save him, and he died in front of his own children. His body was dragged out and dumped on the floor of the adjacent milking parlour. Meanwhile, two of the assailants had taken Brian Waters' car and driven down to Mainwaring Close, where they barged their way into the house and held Julie Waters, Brian's wife, against her will as they ransacked the house, unsuccessfully searching for money. The police, responding to the call made earlier, arrived at the farm very shortly after Mrs. Waters had arrived. The assailants fled across the fields. James Raven was detained nearby, but the others made good their escape. They left behind various DNA traces by which at least some of them could be identified. Chapter 4: A New Life in the Sun. 2 days after the murder, Moore fled the country. Infamous footage of him leaving Liverpool John Lennon Airport was shared in the news when appealing for information on his whereabouts. Moore hadn't gone far. He had travelled to where the majority of British fugitives go to escape the law. He'd flown to southern Spain into Malaga, where he met his girlfriend. She moved on to Ibiza to meet friends, but Moore stayed in Malaga, where his father, Christopher Guest More Jnr, flew out to see him the following month, bringing with him a suitcase filled with clothes and returning with his son's phone. This was a big risk for More Sr., who ran a Stockport-based insurance company and had an extremely successful career. Moore's dad was even sent to prison for 9 months in October 2004 for assisting his son's escape. The following month, his mum also flew out to see her son one final time before he began his new life in hiding. Christopher Moore's movements between 2003 and 2007 are unconfirmed.
We worked really hard with the Spanish authorities trying to trace and locate him. We sent staff out there and we were trying to develop intelligence to try and house him in a location so that we could detain him. We weren't able to do that, and we were disappointed that we weren't able to do that. And we worked for a number of years with the Spanish authorities trying to find Christopher Guest More Jnr. What's evident now is that he'd assumed...
However, while giving evidence during his eventual murder trial, he claimed to have travelled to South Africa and Mozambique using a passport with his new identity of Andrew Lamb and found employment driving boats. A short spell in Turkey followed before he ultimately settled in Malta 4 years on from Mr. Waters' death. Here, Moore, or Lamb, was able to build his reputation as a successful businessman who invested in a variety of high-value deals. The delivery of cargo to Taiwan on behalf of BP, negotiations in Iran, and business with the Moroccan royal family and the Egyptian military were among the dealings mentioned in court, as was an investment of 400,000 Swiss francs, equivalent to around £315,000, in a Libyan company. He lived an extravagant affluent, luxurious and cash-rich lifestyle and went on to find a partner on the sun-soaked Mediterranean island. More worked as a captain out of the exclusive Porto Marso Marina, lived in a large house with a swimming pool and drove a leased white Porsche Cayenne. Years passed and he might have wondered if he had got off scot-free. In the meantime, he watched from afar as his co-conspirators were convicted and jailed. Wilson and Raven were found guilty of murder in 2004 in one of the first UK trials to use cell sighting evidence, data showing the approximate locations of phones via masts. Each received a minimum of 24 years behind bars before Matthews was caged for at least 22 years in 2007, although Guichard was acquitted. Key figures in bringing More to justice have confessed that tracking the investigator-turned-gangster was akin to finding a needle in a haystack. But the elevation of his status to one of Europe's most wanted criminals in May 2019 acted as a springboard for his capture. Detectives were able to gain vital intelligence as a result, although the exact nature of this has not been disclosed. Detective Superintendent Sarah Pengelly led the search for More as head of Cheshire Police's major investigation team from early 2019 onwards. She said, "It was a significant, dogged and determined effort. I was confident that getting Christopher Guest More Jnr. on Europe's most wanted list would generate some intelligence. It was a real game changer for us."
Extradition proceedings are underway after one of Britain's most wanted fugitives was detained in Malta over a brutal killing 16 years ago. Christopher Guest More had been on the run ever since the death of Brian Waters at his family home in Cheshire. The 41-year-old was arrested on Thursday night and is due to appear in court again tomorrow.
British police had identified the arrested man as Mr. More based on photographs. A fingerprint comparison proved a match. The passport under another name had been obtained using false declarations to British authorities. More was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years at Chester Crown Court in December 2021. In a statement, the family of Mr. Waters said what happened at Burnt House Farm had had a significant and long-lasting effect. "We will never be able to forget events of that day, and even now, more than 18 years down the line, we feel the pain on a daily basis with constant flashbacks," they said. "We have remained a close-knit family and have provided much-needed support to each other, but this has been an isolating experience for us. Not only have we lived in fear of reprisals, we have also struggled to trust others as we normally would." The incredible case of Christopher More and his 16 years on the run is another reminder no matter how long has passed, the authorities will never stop looking for you. A life looking over your shoulder is no life at all, and there's no doubt Christopher More would have been wishing he made a different decision that fateful day in June 2003. Thanks for watching another episode from OCG TV. We will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks again to today's sponsor, Fume. Head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, and use code OCGTV or scan the QR code on screen to save 10% off your order today.